Jacksonville is a top 10 US city. You could fit San Francisco inside it 22 times. It has more land area than the entire state of Rhode Island. But last year, it was officially ranked the most boring city in America. And that ranking is not an accident. It is the direct result of one decision Jacksonville made in 1968 that no other American city has ever copied. That decision made it the structural opposite of every city you have ever lived in. They called it the bold new city of the South. Today, nobody says that phrase without a little bit of irony. To understand why, you have to understand what that decision actually did. The reason no other American city has ever copied what Jacksonville did that year is the same reason it feels like nowhere else in America today. Every American city runs on the same basic equation: a small, dense urban core surrounded by separately governed suburbs, constantly fighting each other for tax dollars and political power. Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland, Baltimore, these are the cities where that fight was lost, where the suburbs drained the core until the city collapsed in on itself. New York, Chicago, Boston, these are the cities where the fight produced density, transit, and culture because the core had to compete for its own survival. Every major American city is some version of that war. Jacksonville abolished the war entirely. So, to understand what Jacksonville actually is today, you have to start with what it actually looks like on the ground. And on the ground, it does not look like a city at all. The official number is 874 square miles. That is larger than Rhode Island. It is the single largest city by land area in the contiguous United States, and it is not close. You could drop Boston, San Francisco, Manhattan, and Miami inside the Jacksonville city limits and still have room left over. Inside that footprint, there are pine forests. There are saltwater marshes. There are 2 separate naval bases. There are beach towns, exurbs, subdivisions, industrial zones, and a whole network of tidal creeks, all of it legally a single municipality. And in the middle of all that land sits a downtown so small and so empty that on a weeknight at 6 o'clock you can walk for blocks without seeing another person. Last year, a study from Finance Buzz ranked Jacksonville dead last, the most boring of the 75 largest cities in America. It scored 14.3 out of 100 on their excitement index. 54% of its restaurants are chains. It has one of the lowest rates of nightclubs and concert venues per capita of any big American city. Driving across the city limits can take you 45 minutes and never once deliver you into anything that feels like a downtown. A top 10 American metropolis by population, and yet the actual texture of it is strip malls, cul-de-sacs, and pine trees. But here's the part that should make you stop. Because this is not what happens when a city fails to grow. This is what happens when a city grows in a way no other American city ever has. The decision that inverted everything. Pull up a map of any major American city, and you will see the same shape, a small, dense legal boundary at the center, surrounded by a ring of separately incorporated suburbs, pulling tax revenue outward. Detroit proper is 140 square miles. The Detroit Metro is 4,000. St. Louis proper is 61 square miles. A tiny island inside a county that long ago abandoned it. Baltimore, Cleveland, Buffalo, all the rest. Same pattern, same story. The city does the expensive work of being a city. The suburbs collect the wealth and vote against paying for it. That is the equation. And it is the single biggest reason American downtowns hollowed out in the second half of the 20th century. Jacksonville inverted the equation. The beach communities, the exurbs, the pine forest, the naval bases, the 874 square miles of residential sprawl, they are all legally Jacksonville. There are no suburbs outside the city line for residents to flee to because the suburbs are the city. Which means Jacksonville is not a city with suburbs. It is suburbs arranged in the shape of a city. Every other major American city is a dense core trying to hold back its suburbs. Jacksonville is a city where the suburbs won so completely that they stopped needing a core at all. Drive an hour from downtown Jacksonville and you are still legally in downtown Jacksonville. You can be standing in pine forest next to a 2-lane road miles from the nearest gas station, and the address on the mailbox still reads Jacksonville, Florida. No other American city bends the concept of a city this far. But here is what makes this story so strange. Jacksonville did not stumble into this. It chose this, deliberately, and it chose it because without this decision, Jacksonville might not exist at all. The city that almost didn't survive the 60s. To understand why anyone would vote to merge a city with an entire county, you have to understand what the old Jacksonville actually looked like in the mid-1960s, because by any reasonable measure, it was DYing. The old city was just 39 square miles. Its population had peaked at 204,275 residents in 1950, and it had been hemorrhaging people ever since. White flight was draining the tax base into the surrounding county, and the old 39 square mile city limit had no legal mechanism to reach across the line and tax the neighborhoods the middle class had fled to. Highways cut through working class neighborhoods like surgical scars. The St. Johns River, the wide, beautiful waterway at the heart of the city, was an open sewer. 600 million gallons of raw sewage were being dumped into it every month. The public schools were in such bad shape that all 15 high schools in Duval County lost their accreditation in 1964. Every one of them. In 1966, a grand jury indicted 11 city and county officials on 142 separate counts of bribery and larceny. A local television station aired a documentary called Government by Gaslight that laid out in brutal detail how the entire municipal structure had become a kind of open criminal enterprise. People watched it at home and came away convinced that their government was not just corrupt around the edges. It was structurally, irredeemably broken. The city was out of money, out of reputation, and out of options. And if this kind of hidden structural history is your thing, go ahead and subscribe, because what Jacksonville did next has never been done anywhere else in America. When reformers showed up with a solution nobody else in America had ever tried, the city was desperate enough to say yes. The bold new city of the South. The proposal was almost absurd on its face. Take the dying 39 square mile city and merge it completely with the 750 square mile county that surrounded it. One government, one tax base, one set of schools, one police force, one city council. The suburbs, the unincorporated land, the beaches, the forests, all of it folded into a single legal entity called Jacksonville. In August of 1967, the question went to a countywide referendum. 65% of voters said yes. On October 1st, 1968, the consolidated city of Jacksonville officially woke up. Overnight, it became the largest city by land area in the contiguous United States. And the party was extraordinary. An estimated 200,000 people, nearly half the population of the brand new city, showed up for the celebration. Bells rang across the waterfront at dawn. Boats blew their horns on the St. Johns. There was a parade with marching bands and Shriners and actual military tanks. There was a mass barbecue along the river. There were fireworks. And on every sign, every banner, every piece of civic letterhead, they painted the same phrase in bold letters: bold new city of the South. Hans Tanzler took office as mayor of a city that 24 hours earlier had not existed in its current form. And for a while, it actually worked. Which is what makes this story so strange. The trap wasn't that consolidation failed, the trap was that it succeeded. By the early 1970s, the reformers looked like geniuses. The new unified government could finally plan across what used to be the city's suburb boundary because the boundary was gone. Sewage treatment got built. Within just a few years, Tanzler himself famously water skied down the St. Johns to prove on camera that the river was no longer the open sewer it had been. The image went national. A mayor in a suit and a life vest skimming across his own city's rescued river. Federal dollars flowed in, infrastructure got built, the tax base that had been leaking out into the county was suddenly legally recaptured. Every suburban dollar was now a city dollar. School funding stabilized, police jurisdiction stopped being a patchwork, And because the new Jacksonville had nearly 1 million people inside a single legal boundary, it could start thinking about things that had been unthinkable before. Major league sports, a convention economy, a big city identity. When the NFL eventually awarded the Jaguars to Jacksonville in 1993, local boosters pointed directly at Consolidation as the reason it had been possible. A franchise, a stadium, a national brand, all of it flowing from that single 1968 vote. By every metric the 1968 reformers had promised, the merger delivered. The old Jacksonville had been collapsing. The new Jacksonville was not. The crisis had been solved. But here's what nobody in that 200,000-person crowd understood in 1968. The thing that saved Jacksonville was the same thing that would trap it. When the solution became the problem, Consolidation fixed the short-term bleeding, but it locked in something permanent. It made density structurally impossible. Think about what it means for a single legal city to cover 874 square miles. Every decision the city council makes has to serve a footprint where 90% of the land is low-density suburban, exurban, or outright rural. You cannot zone aggressively for density in a city that is mostly single-family subdivisions and pine forest, because the suburban residents have the votes, and they will use those votes to protect suburban zoning every single time. You cannot build meaningful transit that connects nodes 30 miles apart across swamp and highway. The math of ridership simply does not work when your city is spread over a footprint the size of a small state. You cannot generate the foot traffic friction that makes downtowns valuable, because the scale of the city itself eliminates the need for walkability. When everything is a 15-minute drive, nobody needs a sidewalk. When every neighborhood has its own strip mall, nobody drives downtown for dinner. In a normal American city, the dense urban core and the separately governed suburbs are locked in a permanent political fight. That fight is exhausting and it is expensive, and it is the reason American cities feel dysfunctional. But it is also the fight that produces urbanism. It forces the core to compete. It forces density, it forces transit, it forces culture, because without those things, the core has nothing to offer that the suburbs do not already have. Jacksonville eliminated the fight. And without the fight, there was no pressure. No pressure to build up instead of out, no pressure to invest in a downtown, no pressure to create anything that looked like a real urban core. The merger rescued Jacksonville from becoming Detroit. It also guaranteed that Jacksonville would never become Atlanta. And the cruelest proof of this is not in Jacksonville itself. It is in the cities that almost made the same decision. Not. Look at the other major Florida metros: Orlando, Tampa, Miami. Every one of them faced some version of the same 1960s city versus suburbs crisis that Jacksonville did. None of them consolidated. They stayed fragmented. They stayed politically messy. They stayed, by every measure of governance, less efficient than Jacksonville. And that very messiness, that constant grinding friction between city and suburb, is exactly what forced each of those metros to develop a real urban core. Miami had to become Miami because its downtown was competing against its suburbs for relevance. Orlando and Tampa had to build transit lines, skyline, and density because their old city limits were too small to simply absorb the sprawl. The fight they never escaped is the fight that built them into real cities. Atlanta is the clearest example of all, a tiny municipal core trapped inside a metro of 5 million people, constantly fighting its own suburbs over water rights, transit funding, and tax revenue. Precisely because of that mess, it is one of the most culturally dynamic cities in the South. A visitor to Atlanta sees skyline, nightlife, music, and density. A visitor to Jacksonville sees a strip mall and a parking lot. That difference is not about weather or demographics or luck. It is about whether the city ever had to fight for its own relevance. Jacksonville got clean governance and permanent suburbia. The other Florida metros got ugly governance and actual cities. And that is the deepest irony of this whole story, the thing every other American city spends its energy fighting against. The fragmentation, the friction, the constant political war is the engine of urbanism itself. Which brings us back to 1968. Boring. New city of the South. Picture the waterfront again on the morning of October 1st. 200,000 people in the streets, bells ringing, fireworks. Tanzler at the podium, bold new city of the South painted on every sign along the river. They got exactly what they asked for. They got the biggest city by land area in the contiguous United States. They got clean government. They got a recaptured tax base. They eventually got the NFL. They got, by every specific promise the 1968 reformers made, the future they had voted for. Today, you will occasionally hear locals use a different version of the old slogan, boring new city of the South. It is a joke, but it is the kind of joke that is barely a joke. The strangest thing about it is that nothing went wrong. There was no mistake, no betrayal, no corruption that undid the reform. Everything went exactly right. Jacksonville is the only American city that solved its 1960s crisis by legally becoming the opposite of a city. That is why, on a map, it looks like a metropolis. And that is why, on the ground, it never will be. Every other American city you have ever been in is a fight between a core and its suburbs. In Jacksonville, the suburbs won so completely, they swallowed the core. The bold new city delivered on its promise, and the cost of that promise is that nobody ever built a real city on top of it. The land was conquered, the crisis was solved. The slogan came true. And the city that came out the other side of that victory is the only one in America still living inside it.